Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and what with Baldur's Gate 3 being on the horizon, I thought now would be a good time to review a game that came out a few years ago from the same developers. Divinity Original Sin 2. I bought that game a while back, despite not having played the first Original Sin. Why? Because of the new races. Divinity 2 let you play as lizards and skeletons, and I'm a big fan of RPGs where you can play as skeletons. So that said, let's get to it. What is the game? A CRPG, or tactical RPG, playable online for up to 4 players I believe. When starting the game you can either create your own character or choose from preset characters who have their own unique storylines. If you don't pick one of them you can recruit them to your party in the game as well. I played the game with my friends as that seemed the most fun way to go about it. I must admit I wasn't paying a huge amount of attention to the story, but the general premise of Divinity 2 is that you are a character on a quest for godly power to assist your chosen god. You are a divine, all the while avoiding Templars who would seek to imprison you and the void creatures that are drawn to your divine power. General gameplay involves walking around a large world where there's a huge number of quests and items and characters with which to interact. Whilst out of combat, your abilities can be used more or less freely, such as telekinesis to move items, teleporting your party members across gaps or onto ledges, and so on. Almost every single person you encounter can be killed and has their own inventory with which you can trade. As it's an RPG, there are benefits to having various party members. One might be able to find hidden treasure, another might be silver-tongued and able to talk their way out of any situation, whilst another might be able to identify mysterious objects and items. Each race also has their own perks to make them feel distinct. Skeletons, for example, are immune to poison and death clouds, and they're actually healed by poison, but at the same time healing spells and normal potions will hurt them. And they aren't able to walk around with their faces exposed because people would, understandably, have a seizure if they see the undead. Meanwhile, lizards can dig, elves can eat dead bodies, and so on. In terms of classes, the game lets you choose from a wide number of them at the start, but that's more or less going to impact just your starting spells and equipment. You have the freedom to build your character as you see fit. When you level up, you can put points into different schools of war and magic, such as fire magic, water magic, and various physical things. Which leads us nicely into the combat. Turn-based by nature, when you're playing with friends it means you'll wait for your turn. By yourself you can control the whole party. It's worth pointing out that you can also let other players control your character, if needs be. Your turn order is determined by a stat, and once you have your turn you can then move, attack, and cast spells and use items, all of which use up action points. So you need to be tactical when thinking about how to spend them. Likewise, if you have any points left over, they'll be added onto your next turn, up to a limit. Surfaces play a big role in combat. If you blast oil all over the ground, you can then ignite that oil. You can spread water and turn it into poison, or you can electrocute the water. There are lots of combinations and it makes the game very hectic at times, especially when 3 of your party are all doing that and one member is trying to melee enemies whilst being set on fire and zapped with lightning and frozen. But that, along with the armor system, feel like flaws to me. See, enemies in the game generally have 2 forms of armor protecting their health bar, magic armor and physical armor. You need to chunk that away before you can hurt them. And it makes it feel like the optimal way to play the game is either all melee or all magic, all ranged, all melee, you know? All physical or all magical, all ranged, all melee, to really focus on one or the other. Likewise, the way crowd controlling works in the game, you can be heavily rewarded for just chaining it over and over. So there's definitely what I would say are some flaws there, and indeed some nonsense like a battle starts and then an enemy teleports behind you and one-shots you in a way you couldn't really avoid. Because enemies will quite often just pop out of thin air, meaning you can't really plan your initial placements, and I don't think that's good for a sort of tactical RPG. We should see where the enemies are and be able to plan our placements ahead of time. Which you can, but a lot of the time you can't, because enemies will literally just pop out of thin air and ambush you. For the most part though, the combat is fun. The frustrations rarely overwhelmed that sense of fun, shall we say. Dialogue-wise, you'll get a number of options depending on factors such as your stats, race, abilities, and whatnot, allowing you to roleplay to a certain degree. Although as a very fight-oriented skeleton mage who wasn't about to take any nonsense, nor any sass, I let my friends do most of the talking. And of course you can listen in on conversations so you don't miss out. One nice feature that I enjoyed a lot is when the party will converse amongst themselves, as that always got a chuckle when one of us would say something ridiculous or savage or ridiculously savage. The game also has a narrator who is pretty sassy. All told, I think it's a fun game to play with friends. Even solo, I imagine it would still be good if you're into that sort of game. It's not something I would personally play by myself though. There's great mod support thanks to the Steam Workshop, and as mentioned in basically any game I review with Steam Workshop, it's always an absolute plus. I love the Steam Workshop. I used a mod that let my Fire Mage have several new spells, including one called Pandemic of Fire that was very fun to use. Now of course there are also some mods that will make the game a lot easier, or convenient, and that's up to you. For example, we did use a mod that let us, when we would rest with the bedrolls, it would restore our source points, which is a sort of special type of magic in the game. But how many mods you want, whether it's some slight convenience ones or completely game-changing ones, again, that's up to you. Finally, the game's music and general presentation are good. Graphics are nice and it ran just fine for me. I never really had any problems with frame rate or with the game crashing, even with some mods on. And I didn't even need to download mods, I could just join my friend's lobby and it would automatically download them all for me, which is another nice plus. I'm looking forward to trying out Baldur's Gate 3's, I'm a fan of Dungeons & Dragons sort of world and setting. Now granted, D&D doesn't really have like a skeleton race for players generally, and I probably won't be able to play a Lich or whatever, but oh well. There's always the next best fantasy race. Dwarves. Until next time, you guys take care. Ciao.